What makes organizations thrive in times of upheaval? Why do some grow, expand, flourish, while others fail? Today, we're talking about upheaval-proof organizations and how your organization can become one.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds.
My name is Peter Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
Good morning and welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. This is a 30-minute conversation with leaders of mission-based organizations. Today we are talking about upheaval. I want to welcome all our listeners from the United States, Australia, and around the world. And I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Rebecca Tuttle and Cynthia Rojas.
Good morning.
Hi everyone.
How are you?
Good.
I'm good.
Right,
so we're going to talk a little bit about upheaval, conflict, internal, external. It's going to be a great show.
We've had 2-ish, 3-ish years to learn about this, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but before we jump right in, because I have a lot of things running through my mind, Peter, do you want to put into perspective or put into context, what are you defining or are we defining as upheaval?
Okay. So I think that there are external upheavals, right? Like COVID, right? We have to change how we work or where we work, upheaval, or we have to change what we do, upheaval, right? The community's needs have changed and we're doing something completely different. Then I think also there are internal upheavals that we maybe don't pay enough attention to, right? Or realize the significance of. And those are things like our really well-loved and charismatic executive director has left the organization, right?
Yeah.
And that's a huge one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
a
like
really
a
big
mourning period. That is a huge transition.
Yeah. Yep.
It is. One of my first research projects was to learn or understand the impact of a CEO transition. And here's what organizations want to be careful about. When CEOs or EDs transition, there is a sentiment of, oh my God, this is not good, or I love that person. I can't imagine this organization not having that person. If there is not some kind of analysis of your executive team and who is more likely to leave, which will enable you to get in front of that, you might lose really significant people. And so there's this quote that we always say, no one's indispensable. But I'll tell you something, a whole lot of people could be what makes or breaks your organization because they take their knowledge with them.
Yeah.
So we want to be very, very mindful. So that is a huge upheaval. Has that ever happened to you, Peter?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The director left.
Yeah. And I think there are kind of two main categories of executive directors. There are really charismatic people that get everybody excited and people love to be in a room with them. And there are good administrators that, right, keep everything moving forward and keep all the balls in the air and the lights on. Some people can do both, but very few people are super at both, right? And that's if you've read Rocket Fuel, right? That's the basis of that book. I think honestly, it's worse when the former type of executive director or leader leaves the organization because they tend to get by on all the good sentiment, right? And they don't necessarily need to create systems, right? They generate so much positivity and energy and we can do this, that then when they're gone, nobody has any idea what they're supposed to be doing. right? That's pretty upsetting. Now, the second type of leader, who's left behind a lot of systems and checklists, right? People, in a lot of cases, can keep going, can keep doing the procedures,
Yeah.
easily. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead,
That's what we see the other team members. We talk about tapping into people's abilities and eagerness for growth. I would think that the second type of director would be the one that would encourage other people on the team to want to move up into that role because they would feel more confident going into it. Whereas,
Right.
I don't really know what they did, but they did a great job at it for the former. So, but ideally, if someone knows that they're leaving, that they would hopefully mentor some of their team members.
And we did a really good show. I can't remember how long ago, but we did a really good show on succession planning that talked about how to get an organization ready for a leader's departure, so that it's less traumatic for everyone.
Yeah. So there's enough research that has been tested on who is more likely to leave and less likely to leave. There are a lot of variables that get involved. One, the style of the current or exiting leader and the style of the incoming leader.
Oh,
right. Relationships.
Yeah.
Also, if there's a dynamic that there was an internal applicant and that person did not get the job and it was assumed by many that they would, that creates a very interesting dynamic. You could end up splitting relationships.
Yep.
Right. So I worked at an organization where the exiting leader was beloved, but I thought the entering leader was amazing. So it created two teams, team former and team new. And that was really, really interesting. And it lasted many years. And
I remember for most of my career, whenever I heard somebody was leaving their role, I would think, oh no, this is terrible. Nobody can do that job quite like that, right? And then the new person would come in with ideas and strengths that had just never occurred to me. Like, nobody can do the job the way the former person did. They do a slightly different version of the job, and it's not, sometimes it's better. I mean, sometimes the organization has grown and the job is actually expanded, right? And so maybe it is bigger and better, or it's just different. It's expanding the capacity in a different way, or it's, more up to date, right? They're bringing in new ideas that are more, more on trend, more like in keeping with where the field is. It's never a bad thing, right? Not in the way that I expected, right?
Yes. But there are other upheavals, right? So we saw the pandemic and what it did to a lot of organizations. But another upheaval that I have experienced and see all the time is losing a major grant.
Oh,
right? Major funding, $500,000. It was half of your budget, and now it's gone. And so, I forget the quote, but I remember reading that people need leaders during a time of crisis. That's where there's this need for true leadership. And I mean, this is a very long time ago, and this person has changed dramatically. But when 9/11 happened, right, the mayor of New York City rose to his leadership in a way that I had never seen. And it was powerful, and it was amazing. And it was what our country needed, right? So when there is a crisis, the first thing you have to do is look internally, right? Do your processing, because people are going to need you. They really, really look to the leader because they feel unstable. So all of this is about loss and feeling vulnerable. This is what we're really talking about. So if we were having a show on grief, I would be saying the same exact thing.
Right. I was a director of my department, and then I have very good friends with the woman in the other department who was the director, and she left. And I have to be honest with you, I really enjoyed her company at work. We were a great team. We build off ideas and planning and things. And I really was crying. There were days I cried, and I just felt this sense of loss. And I had to be strong for the team, because obviously I didn't want people to see me crying in my office. But other people felt the same loss, and it takes a lot of willpower to focus on, okay, well, here are the assets we have. Here is what we do have. How are we going to move forward toward our goal, instead of, oh gosh, it's just not the same around here, or what are we going to do now? And in the example you gave about the funding, that's why I remember a few episodes I had said that I really only go 35% of the budget in grants. The rest should come from other revenues, because that's a catastrophic event if that happens.
Yes.
And when that happens, it shows you that internally that organization wasn't planning for the what if. And that's really hard. And that can also cause a lot of animosity. So how do you help organizations work through that animosity when at that point people are like, I'm going to lose my job, or it was your fault, it was their fault? How do you help people work through that? Because that in and of itself is upheaval.
Yes. And it's a wonderful, wonderful question. And blaming or looking for something to blame is not the answer, right? Again, there has to be a grief process. So you just lost half of your budget, right? Maybe there's not a meeting the very next day because we're all emotionally charged. Maybe we talk about it 3-4 days down the line, depending on how much of an impact this is having. But usually when you know that funding is ending, you have some time. And so you bring everybody back. And if you have a healthy organization, you could do a post-mortem analysis on what went wrong, what could have gone wrong, without it being finger pointing, but actually it being a learning. And so you have to create psychological safety around that. I used to call these postmortems the F project, right? And so F stand for fail. And so you would think that's terrible. That sounds like finger pointing. But I wanted to make the word fail not seem like a terrible thing, but actually something that prompts learning. So I used to use the word failure, right? We failed at this, but it was a we. It wasn't like you did this, you did this. And when you do that kind of factor analysis, you start to learn. And every crisis is an opportunity to be better. I know
that sounds like something that you're going to have to start in advance, right? I mean, if we've just had a big, massive failure, now's probably not the time to have our first F project meeting, right? We should start with a small mishap, right?
Yeah.
And work our way up. Yeah. So maybe that's one of the practices in building an upheaval-proof organization is start to embrace failures. Right?
Yes. Yeah. And psychological safety is really important. I worked for an organization that you could make mistakes and it was okay. I was always blown away by that. I was like, one time I was like, what does it take to get fired here? Right. And it was such a learning organization. It was amazing. It was amazing. So we could have failure project conversations, right? But you're right, Peter. You grow into that. You don't do it when you lost half your budget.
I saw a post on LinkedIn, that said something like, how far into somebody's job is it acceptable for them to make mistakes? And I was like, but I've been doing my job a long time. I definitely make mistakes. I thought, the flip of this question is like, at what point in your job do we assume you know everything and you're never going to try anything new? And
I don't think ever.
Right. And if that's the expectation in your organization, then you can answer that question, but understand you're never going to have any growth, right? If you never have any mistakes, right?
By taking that time to digest and refocus your energy, you also have to prepare for the conversations to share with your board, because they have to be well informed. And oftentimes there's a fear there, or an inclination to want to
Mhm.
tell the truth, sort of. But
Sugarcoat it. Yeah.
yeah. And
Because
so,
you don't have that culture of saying, hey, here's where we failed and here's why, and this is really an interesting case study. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I say this thing to funder reports. When you start a new project and you get funding, you make these really ambitious proposals about what's going to happen, right? That, 100 children are going to enroll and they're all going to have a fantastic time and everyone's going to learn everything, right?
90% are going to change their
Right. And then a few months later, only 10 children are enrolled and you've had to make some tweaks. And then people don't want to fill in their reports to funders or kind of want to fudge. And I would say, oh no, let's call them up. Like, this is the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
This is the opportunity to say, hey guys, we're all on the same team here. And we all, like reasonable thinking adults, thought that this thing was going to happen. And something else is happening and it's interesting and let's talk about it. And let's get on the same page about how we should make adjustments and, tweak our plan. Like, I think that is the most productive use. And I think your funders can be thrilled to hear from you.
Well, that's how you're like giving the money back. But also they say to you too, well, what if we gave you more money to do this other thing? Because it seems like this other thing is what the community is asking for or needs.
Right.
That's always a win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I learned a long time ago that funders really do see themselves as your partners.
Yeah.
And they love when you come back and say, look at what we've learned.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not, I mean, one time somebody told me it gets very suspicious if everything's too perfect. Right. And so when you're dealing with humans, there should be a lot of learning. Yeah, there should be a lot of. And
you're working with hard problems. I mean, I say this so often, but anything simple and easy has been solved.
Right.
Right. It's the year 2022. Like, everything easy is already done. So let's just be honest about the fact that we work on hard, complicated things. We're trying to implement innovative and complex solutions. We're trying to be creative. And it's not always going to go the way we expect. And that's the idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the organizations that do have the upheaval in check, that they're like, we got this, right? We've climbed higher mountains than this before.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do they have that other organizations don't when they look at upheaval as, oh my gosh, the lava's coming down the mountain and that's it for us,
Yeah.
So what do they have and what can they learn from other organizations?
I think that's a wonderful question. They tend to have leaders who do not overreact and really pause and think and use it as a time of reflection. They also tend to have good communication throughout, up and down and across the organization. And the leaders exhibit compassion so that they also hear where people are in terms of their loss. We talked about how we could be talking about grief and we would be saying the same things. A leader that understands that there's a loss process in all of this and gives individuals the time to process that loss is going to create a resilient organization. But I have seen leaders and know of leaders that people have told me about that if you came in and told them bad news, they will fly off the handle. And so the leader can't handle the bad news. That is not good. That is not good. That organization does not manage upheavals really well. And so we have to know ourselves as leaders. So in the state of Connecticut, we had a tragedy, I think 11, 12 years ago in Newtown. And so I was the leader of a nonprofit that worked with young kids. And I had to take care of a lot of staff, especially staff who were parents and felt like, oh my God, that could have been my child. And every night for a week, I came home and meditated. I did not watch the news. I did not turn it on because I know that my job was to support staff. It was not to keep up with the horror of what was happening. And so it prepared me every day to go into the office and hug people and hold on to them and listen to their stories and also plan and keep some kind of stability. And I realized that I had to use who I was to do that.
I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. What other upheavals? The pandemic. The pandemic is a little unique though.
It keeps on changing.
Because it is all of the things at once, right? It's
and it was fast.
Right. It's what we've been calling a landscape level disaster, meaning, right, it affects the community that you're serving and your organization all at once, right? It's both internal and external in that way. And so the not-for-profits that we talk to were adjusting their operations, right? Working from home or whatever other changes, taking their courses and offering them online and all of these things, but adapting to the fact that their community's needs had changed, right? Because there was a lot more need. While their staff were stressed. I mean, their staff don't get to go home at night and not be living through a pandemic, right?
Yes.
So it had all of the elements, right? Leaders themselves are afraid, right, for their own safety and the safety of their families, right? It was all of the things. So what have we seen in the organizations that we think have done better?
Well, I'll tell you this, and it's a little scary for me. So the organizations that have done better, the EDs have not taken time off, which is very scary to me. The EDs have shown up and put others first, right? Many of the EDs have also support at home. And so I say this because we are starting to see articles about the PTSD brought on by the pandemic. And so my fear is that leaders had to go through so much that 28 months in, we're starting to see a lot of them leave. A lot of them are retiring. So I think there's still some time, time is gonna tell about the impact, but that's what I saw. Leaders who really saw themselves as a vehicle to support their staff.
Yeah.
I was in the store the other day and I saw this sign and it was so strange because it was right eye level with me on the shelf. And I thought, there's a reason I'm being pointed over here, right? And on one side, it said self-care. And I wanted to scribble it and write structure. And on the other side, when you turn it around, it says workday. And I thought, it would be great if...
That's so problematic.
Well, I'm like, it would be great if we could just turn around and say, you know what, today is just too much. And I'm allotted this time and I really need to take some time away. And feel like we can do that, because I feel before the pandemic, there was so much fear of I'm going to lose my job, or if I don't answer this email at midnight, then people are going to be disappointed. And I think it really put into perspective for people that what's really important, is it that midnight email, or is it being with your family for fear of a pandemic we've never seen before? And leaders who showed up every day and lent that support, I'm sure they're exhausted, but where it's going to come into play really important for people is when they need that care, when they need that time away, is to be able to give it to them and to step up in times of upheaval. Because even that absence, but they do take that time off, maybe it's a year from now, that could also cause an upheaval, and being sensitive to the needs of that person is important too. But it was making me laugh when I saw that brick. I thought, that easy.
I mean, we've talked a lot about self-care and structural care, and we've seen a lot of organizations that are moving in the direction of structural care. But I wonder if organizations that already had practices, right, of taking breaks, of covering for each other, of, right, um, did better or have done better. Do you have any?
I don't know.
We should invite some guests on to talk about that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. We should.
So we would want somebody who has had structural care embedded
Yeah.
in how they did during the pandemic. That would make a great show.
That would make an excellent show.
Interesting. Yeah. But I've seen so many organizations that I think are creating it now, right? I mean, it's become, right? Like organizations shutting down for a week or two so that everyone is on vacation. It's kind of becoming the norm, which is fantastic. But I wonder if there were practices in place before, or at least just a culture, right? You know, if people had a culture of saying, guys, I'm having a tough morning, I'm going to be logging on at 10, right? Before the pandemic, did that make them stronger, better organizations during the pandemic?
Yeah.
They would shut down to clean for 2 weeks, right? So we have to think about, well, if let's say the flu season comes, they might shut down for 2 weeks to clean. Well, what about shutting down just to give people's minds some time for that meditation that you mentioned?
I have noticed a lot of things in the for-profit sector. Recently I went to a store, it was 8:30. They were closed. I said to myself, no, they would stay open till 9 p.m. And they changed the hours. They're closed at 7. I've noticed restaurants now are more and more of them are not open on Monday or Sunday. And one of my favorite restaurants no longer serves lunch. They only serve dinner. They're only open from 5:30 to I think 10:30. And so we are changing as a society. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. And we also have to change the standard workday from 9 to 5 because it doesn't work for a lot of people. If you have to be in an office during that time and everybody else is shutting down, it's that's going to cause upheaval eventually. We have to change as a society. Everybody go home at 3 o'clock. You know what? 3 o'clock.
I think people should work when they want to work, except on Fridays. Nobody should work on Fridays.
I love that. I love that. So we talked a lot about different upheavals, right? So we talked about when a CEO transitions and really looking at your executive team and making sure that you take notice of the relationships and how that might impact someone's intention to leave. Let's be compassionate around how these relationships matter. Rebecca, you talked about crying because a staff person left. It is a deep loss, right? So give that space. When we mess up or when we lose a big grant, right? Creating psychological safety so that individuals can talk about what may have gone wrong without it being finger pointing, right? So really about what was it about our process that went wrong? And then we talked about how when there is a crisis, people look to leaders. So all this talk about shared leadership is great, except in the middle of a crisis. Don't look for shared leadership during that time. What we look for is someone to point to and ask, are we going to be okay? Right? And then lastly, what was the last point we talked about? Oh my God, Peter, help me. The last one we just talked about.
Structural care.
Structural care. No, there was something about.
Okay. I have it in my notes. Let me see.
There you go, Rebecca.
As we talked about failure and having that a prompt for learning. Yeah.
So it's really about creating that space. So there are many ways to build a resilient organization. And so what you're seeing are some themes. Understand that there's loss. Make sure that you do some self-reflection because others are going to depend on you. And also optimism goes a long way. Rebecca said, what if we had a leader that said, we've been through this hurdle. We've done this before. Remind your staff of that because we tend to forget. We're far more resilient than we believe we are.
Mm.
That's what I got for you.
Well, have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Have a great weekend.